Why would a top Boston architect on the cusp of a life-changing partnership abruptly abandon his city triumph for a treacherous 100-mile drive into a blizzard? Daniel Hawthorne had spent years building a wall of success, replacing his parents' quiet love with the relentless roar of a high-stakes career. But a single frail note, written by his coughing father, shattered that illusion, forcing him to race against the clock and the merciless Maine snow. Now he sees the terrifying truth. The old oil lantern lit for him for 5 Christmases is almost out. Did Daniel arrive in time to apologize and embrace the one thing he couldn't buy, a cold cup of cocoa and a moment with his aging parents, or is it already too late? Find out the conclusion to this deeply emotional story of regret and redemption. Support our channel by subscribing to see more tales that remind us where true value lies. Click the newest video that just appeared on your screen. The biting Maine cold was a living thing, a predatory beast that pressed against the old window panes of Pine Haven. December had brought the heaviest snow in years, blanketing the isolated farmhouse in a thick, insulating shroud of white. Outside, the world was a study in stillness and silence. Inside, there was only the soft, persistent crackle of the oak burning low in the hearth. 72-year-old Walter Hawthorne sat in his favorite worn armchair, bundled in a thick plaid blanket. He was thin, and every time he shifted, a dry, rattling cough tore through his chest, a sound that worried Martha more than the relentless winter. Walter's gaze kept drifting to the frosted kitchen window, his optimism fading with the weak daylight. Lying almost perfectly still at Walter's feet was Buster, their old black-and-white sheepdog. Buster was 17 years old, arthritic, and mostly deaf to household sounds. But for 5 years now, he had developed a curious sensitivity. At the faint rumble of a heavy engine far down the county road, often just a logging truck or a delivery van, Buster's ears would lift, twitching forward with a sudden weary focus. He never barked. He just listened, a sentinel of quiet, long-held hope. Martha, 70 years old, and moving slower than the year before, was finishing the final touches on their modest hand-cut Christmas tree. She had draped the branches with strings of popcorn and cranberries, refusing the modern glitter Daniel had once sent them. Her hand paused, hovering over a spot near the top. She carefully hooked a small, tarnished metal keychain, a tiny pine tree Daniel had picked up during a high school trip, onto a sturdy branch. The gesture was a private prayer. "He will call." Martha. Walter managed his voice raspy after a coughing fit. "The roads are bad. He's probably waiting until the last minute." Martha's lips pressed into a thin line. She knew the truth lay not in the roads, but in the city. She picked up the old cordless phone and retreated to the hallway, dialing the familiar Boston number. "Daniel?" she asked softly when he finally answered, hearing a chaotic background noise of sharp voices and clinking glasses. "Mom, I told you I'm completely buried right now." Daniel's voice sounded rushed and slightly impatient, a corporate echo bouncing over the poor connection. "We're pushing this massive commercial center project. I'll make it up during New Year's. Okay, Merry Christmas." The line went dead. Martha stood there for a long moment, the silence of the farmhouse rushing back in to fill the space Daniel's hurried voice had occupied. The house felt heavier. She hung up the phone. She did not mention the call to Walter, only remarking that Daniel was busy but safe. As the last vestiges of twilight faded, Martha pulled on a heavy coat and stepped out onto the porch. The air immediately seized her lungs. She carefully poured oil into the old hurricane lantern, struck a match, and watched the soft orange glow expand into the freezing air. It was a ritual now maintained for 5 long, silent Christmases, a humble, unwavering beacon for a son who was too busy looking at the city lights. The 24th floor of the towering glass edifice shimmered under the cold electric lights of Boston. It was 3 o'clock on Christmas Eve, and Daniel Hawthorne, 35 years old, felt the familiar surge of adrenaline and exhaustion. He was bent over a sprawling set of blueprints, the lines and angles of the proposed commercial center, consuming his entire focus. This project, which promised him the coveted partnership role at the firm, was his entire world. His modern studio apartment 10 blocks away was sterile and organized, a stark contrast to the comfortable clutter of Pine Haven, but he hadn't slept there in 2 days, preferring the buzz of the office, where the demanding environment muted the nagging voice of guilt. His diet consisted of lukewarm, strong black coffee and protein bars eaten standing up. The incessant ringing of his work phone was the soundtrack to his success, validating his commitment. Daniel repeatedly told himself that this grueling pace was necessary, a form of higher sacrifice. "I'm building a better future for them," he muttered the phrase, a hollow mantra against the polished window that overlooked the city's glittering chaos. He envisioned sending his parents a large check in January 2024, a tangible representation of his love that he felt was more valuable than his physical presence. The thought of stepping back into the quiet, slow life of Maine, where time seemed to move with the speed of thawing ice, felt suffocating. He dreaded facing the reality of his parents' increasing frailty, the undeniable evidence of time he could not stop or buy back. His Christmas plan was already meticulously laid out, an exclusive black tie event on a rooftop lounge overlooking the harbor, a place populated by developers, investors, and fellow architects. It was a crucial networking opportunity, a celebration not of family but of upward trajectory. He had selected a sleek dark suit, ready to seamlessly transition from the tireless professional to the charismatic socialite. Just as he was marking a final adjustment on a structural column, his personal phone vibrated softly on the edge of the desk. It was Walter. Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second, then answered, keeping his voice low and professional. "Dad, I'm literally closing out the quarter. I have 15 seconds. There was a pause on the other end, punctuated by a weak, dry cough that resonated in the quiet office space, sounding much closer than hundreds of miles away. "Just wanted to check in, son. Heard the news talking about a blizzard hitting your way soon. Are the city streets busy? Make sure you keep warm." Walter's tone was tender, focused only on Daniel's well-being, but Daniel heard only the delay and the interruption. "Yes, Dad, it's fine. Everything's under control here. Gotta run okay. Happy holidays." He hung up, returning to his blueprints with forced intensity. He barely registered the call, yet a subtle pressure began to build behind his eyes, a familiar void creeping in where warmth should have been. He had traded the simple, genuine love waiting in Pine Haven for the cold, demanding promise of a career, and for a fleeting moment, the high-rise office felt less like a launch pad and more like a cage. The final blueprint was signed. Daniel leaned back in his leather chair, watching the senior vice president nod approvingly before confirming the partnership offer. Success had been delivered, wrapped in a polished veneer of corporate approval. Yet, instead of the expected euphoria, a profound hollowness settled in Daniel's chest like a cold stone. He felt detached from the achievement that had consumed 5 years of his life. The sensation was interrupted by the quiet appearance of a messenger. The man carried a small, clumsily wrapped parcel tied with coarse twine. The shipping label identified it not from a major carrier, but from a small local delivery service operating out of Bangor, Maine. It was an indication of the immense effort required to rush a package out of their remote corner of the state on Christmas Eve. Daniel dismissed the messenger, his hands suddenly trembling as he cut the twine. He peeled back the brown paper. The first thing he pulled out was a hand-knitted scarf, moss green, the color of the pines surrounding his home. It was thick and smelled faintly of wood smoke. His mother's handiwork, no doubt, though he noticed a section near the fringe where the stitches were uneven, almost clumsy, a small jarring flaw that hinted at hands less steady than they used to be. Next was a packet of pure, rich hot cocoa mix, his favorite treat since childhood. Beneath the items lay a flimsy Christmas card, sealed inside an envelope addressed simply to Daniel. He pulled out the small paper and saw the handwriting instantly. It was Walter's. The letters were weak, written in pencil that had been pressed too hard in some places and barely marked the paper in others. It was the same handwriting Daniel remembered from January 2009, when Walter had signed the final loan papers to put him through architecture school, his usually steady signature reduced to a hesitant scrawl under the pressure of the debt. He read the message, "Son, this cocoa must be made right away. Don't let it go cold. The porch light is still burning. Drive home safely. Mom and Dad." The words were simple, yet they struck Daniel with the physical force of a blow. The faint, almost illegible quality of the writing was the final undeniable evidence he had avoided. Walter was truly ill. His lungs might be failing, but his love was utterly steadfast. The instruction to not let the cocoa go cold became a terrifying metaphor. Daniel looked up past the sleek glass and the polished steel of his desk, out toward the dazzling indifferent glow of the Boston skyline. The million lights of the city felt cheap and garish compared to the single fragile flicker of the old oil lantern his parents mentioned, burning faithfully in the vast darkness of Maine. He realized with gut-wrenching certainty that the promotion, the party, and the entire edifice of his career success meant nothing if he lost the chance to see his father again. He snatched his phone and typed 2 hurried emails canceling the rooftop party and deferring the partnership discussion until the new year. He did not wait for replies. He grabbed his keys and the moss-green scarf, shoving the fragile card into his inner jacket pocket. He ran out of the 24th floor office, shedding his corporate persona like a useless skin, heading straight for the parking garage where his dusty, reliable old pickup truck, the last remnant of Pine Haven, waited for the long, dangerous drive home. Daniel's dusty old pickup truck, a machine built for the harsh rural reality of Maine, not the polished glass canyons of Boston, roared onto Interstate 95 north. The city lights quickly vanished in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the darkness and the fast-approaching blizzard. Snow was already dumping heavily, fat flakes colliding with the windshield, forcing Daniel to lean forward, gripping the wheel until his knuckles were white. The wind began to howl outside the cab, a mournful sound that mirrored the growing anxiety in his chest. The journey north was a brutal physical trial, but the mental journey was far worse. With the noise of the city finally muted, the silence of the truck became a deafening echo chamber for his regrets. He had successfully buried his guilt for years under layers of deadlines and contracts, but now exposed to the elements, the truth hammered him relentlessly. He remembered January 2017, the year the company demanded he stay for the holiday to secure his first large contract. He had promised Walter and Martha they could finally take that Alaskan cruise they dreamed of. Instead, he simply mailed a check and offered a cheerful, dismissive phone call, ignoring Walter's quiet disappointment. That was the first missed Christmas, the broken promise that had set the pattern. A particularly violent gust of wind caused the truck to hydroplane briefly on a sheet of black ice. The vehicle slid toward the median barrier with a terrifying grating sound before Daniel wrestled it back under control. He pulled over, shaking, his heart racing. In that instant of near disaster, his mind flashed not to the ruined contract or the truck, but to Walter's frail voice on the phone hours earlier. "I'm literally closing out the quarter. I have 15 seconds. The shame was overwhelming. He hadn't just missed Walter's 70th birthday. He had missed Martha's eye surgery in 2023 because he was finalizing a condo design. He hadn't sent flowers to their anniversary last June, instead sending a quick text message. He hadn't been building a better life for them. He had been building a wall between them and himself, using his success as insulation against the reality of their aging. He jammed the gear shift into drive and pushed forward the urgency, now a desperate physical need. He drove until the familiar silhouette of the Pine Haven County line sign materialized through the blowing snow. The roads here were unplowed, forcing the truck to grind through thick drifts. He finally turned onto the long, dark dirt driveway. The snowfall was so heavy the headlights barely cut through the air. Daniel killed the engine and stepped out into the crushing cold. The only illumination was the porch. There on the post was the old hurricane lantern, but it was not burning brightly. The oil reservoir was nearly empty, and the flame was a desperate tiny pinpoint of yellow light wavering in the frigid wind, threatening to vanish completely. The house was engulfed in darkness, utterly silent save for the weak glow spilling from a single window, the kitchen. Daniel's breath hitched in his throat. The fear was no longer abstract. It was a cold, metallic taste in his mouth. The darkness of the house felt less like sleep and more like an absence. He rushed the porch, pulling the moss-green scarf tighter around his neck, driven by the terrifying, unsettling silence that surrounded Pine Haven. The heavy latching door to Pine Haven groaned softly as Daniel pushed it open, dragging a wave of frigid air into the small entryway. The fear that had been building since he saw the flickering lantern intensified. He stepped quietly into the kitchen, the weak light from the single window barely cutting through the gloom. The cold air in his lungs tightened his chest, a sensation that immediately reminded him of Walter's persistent cough. And then he saw them. Walter and Martha were slumped over their kitchen table, asleep in the same high-backed wooden chairs they had used for 50 years. They were leaning against each other, fully dressed in their thick old sweaters, their hands resting near 2 chipped ceramic mugs. In the center of the table, the surface of the liquid in the mugs was dull, confirming what Daniel dreaded. 2 cups of cold hot cocoa prepared hours ago, left to solidify as they fought sleep to wait for him. Daniel moved with the utmost care, his heavy work boots almost silent on the aged floor. As he approached, a faint low sound drifted from the shadow beneath Walter's chair. It was Buster. The old sheepdog lifted his head slowly, his eyes cloudy but fixed on Daniel. Buster let out a soft, deep whimper, a sound of recognition and relief that was more poignant than any loud greeting. The dog dragged its heavy body out from under the chair, managing a slow, wobbling gait toward Daniel. It rubbed its rough head against Daniel's leg, a sign of loyal, unconditional welcome, and a quiet, joyful sound emanated from its throat. The movement and the sound stirred Martha. She inhaled sharply and slowly opened her eyes. They blinked once, then widened as they focused on the tall figure standing over the table, dusted with snow and clutching the moss-green scarf. Daniel. She whispered the name, catching in her throat before dissolving into a low weeping sound. "Did you really drive all the way home?" Daniel knelt beside her, immediately dropping his coat on the floor. He didn't speak, only pulling her into a tight embrace, feeling the terrifying fragility of her shoulders under the wool. This close, he could smell the comforting scent of wood smoke and old wool on her sweater. Walter stirred at the noise. He opened his eyes, which were heavy and tired, and spotted his son kneeling next to him. A flash of pure, unadulterated joy lit up his face, pushing away the exhaustion. Walter raised a frail hand, reaching for Daniel's shoulder. He managed a short, rattling cough. "You're home?" Walter murmured, his voice incredibly weak, but laced with an unshakable warmth. He gripped Daniel's hand, his fingers surprisingly strong in the clutch. "The best gift, son. This Christmas is so warm." They moved slowly to the living room, Daniel using his foot to stoke the embers, rekindling the fire in the hearth. The 3 of them sat together, Daniel wedged between his parents on the worn sofa. He pulled the crumpled card from his pocket, tears finally streaming down his cheeks. "I am so sorry, Mom. Dad," he choked out, his voice thick with shame, "for every year, for being gone, for being 15 seconds too busy." Walter squeezed his hand gently. "We don't need the cruise, Daniel. We don't need gifts. We only needed you here. Your return brought Christmas with you." As the fire grew stronger, filling the room with comforting heat and light, Daniel reached into his jacket. He pulled out the tiny, tarnished pine tree keychain he had carried in his pocket since leaving Boston. He walked over to the tree and carefully replaced it on the branch where Martha had hung it earlier, making a silent vow that the distance between them would never feel that far again. Outside, the wind had died down and the heavy snowfall had ceased. Through the window, the world was pristine white, reflecting the soft golden light of the hearth fire that enveloped Pine Haven completely. Daniel looked at his parents, at Buster, now asleep peacefully at his feet, and finally understood. Success could wait, but this quiet, finite time, this true home could not. The warmth of Pine Haven reminds us that the most valuable commodity we possess is not our career success, but the finite time we dedicate to love. Loyalty like Buster's and devotion like Walter and Martha's ask only for presence. If this simple truth resonated with you, please subscribe and share this quiet message of home with others. For another tale of unexpected Christmas magic, click the newest video that just appeared on your screen.